So welcome JBS viewers to Fighting Anti-Semitism, the ISGAP Hour. I'm Charles Small, I'm the director of ISGAP, and I'm honored to be with Michal Cotler-Wunsh, who's a special envoy of Israel on combating anti-Semitism. She's the special envoy on anti-Semitism, and we're here at St. Catherine's College at Oxford University for the ISGAP-Oxford Summer Program on Curriculum Development in Contemporary Anti-Semitism Studies. So Michal, thank you for being here, and you gave an amazing talk last night, as usual. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Charles.
So you were speaking last night and just now with me about sort of the failure of imagination, the failure of Jewish organizations in the United States and even the Israeli establishment, the security establishment, the political establishment. There was a failure of imagination to see what was sort of brewing underneath the surface. We had October the 7th, we had the largest pogrom against Jewish people since the end of the Shoah take place, which was horrific and terrifying. I don't have the words to explain it. But sort of adding another layer of horror was the reaction of civil society in the United States and in Europe, intellectuals, students at some of the best universities, the media of record, sort of piling on and not coming to the defense of innocent people being attacked and murdered and raped and pillaged by a reactionary perversion of Islam fused with Nazism, with GoPro cameras so they can record what they were doing to attract more support among Islamists in the world. That Hamas actually intentionally recorded this to gain support. What went wrong? What went wrong with the major Jewish organizations, with their strategies? What do you think happened?
So the first thing I want to say is I don't so much call it a failure, because I understand with a great deal of empathy and understanding, hindsight is 20/20, where it came from. The understanding that after thousands of years, Jews, a prototypical indigenous people, returned to our ancestral homeland after thousands of years of exile and persecution, and that state is committed to equality, just Israel's Declaration of Independence. In many ways, and the realization of that vision, mission, and values, I think created an anomalous thought that anti-Semitism died in Auschwitz, and that the rebirth of this ancestral homeland would, in fact, be the response to what the atrocities of the Holocaust were, meaning never again was the response of the State of Israel, the return of that indigenous people, and the understanding that from the moment of the inception of that return of an indigenous people, there has been war, constant war, from the moment that it was proclaimed until, I'm going to say, 1973, a series of conventional wars intended to annihilate that state that kept us in this reactive mode as a country and certainly as a people. And in many ways, sort of created a different understanding of reality for those of us, 45% that live in Israel, the 45% that live in North America, the 10% that live in the rest of the world, created this different reality. I'm sharing all that because I want to make very clear, there is no place for blame in where we are now in a post-10/7 reality. The next thing that I believe was largely missed, not just by the State of Israel, not just by Jews around the world, but in fact by the international institutions, mechanisms, and principles that were appropriated and weaponized, the next big thing that was missed was the launching of an unconventional war for public opinion that would morph anti-Semitism to what we see today. That would demonize and would delegitimize and apply double standards to not just the individual Jew, barring them from an equal place in society, as we have seen historically when we were stateless, but a whole new strain of anti-Semitism, we'll call it anti-Zionism, that denies the right of Jewish self-determination, that denies the right of the State of Israel to exist in any border, and that would mutate based on the same mechanism, the same Natan Sharansky's 3Ds, demonize, delegitimize, and apply double standards to the proverbial Jew among the nations, that is the State of Israel, intended to be the state of the Jews, but turned into the Jew of the state. What I'm trying to say is, nobody could have imagined this Orwellian inversion of fact and of law. looking at the incredible entrusting of the creation of those institutions post-World War II, so that never again, based on these foundational principles written in the ash and the blood of 6 million Jews murdered and systematically annihilated in the Holocaust, nobody could have imagined the turn of events. Now, we did miss, I'm going to say along the way, the sort of turning points that systematically enabled the point that we reached. And I mentioned one, the 1975 Zionism is Racism UN resolution, Soviet propaganda, Zionism is racism, not new, but that in the name of progress is alive and well on university campuses today, in 2024, blood libel number 1, Zionism is racism. If you can convince the world that Zionism is racism, then you have taken another step in the mutation of anti-Semitism. Next, of course, and we've discussed it, the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism. If you can convince the world that Israel's an apartheid state, there is nothing to do with it but to dismantle it. And third, the most Orwellian inversion of fact and of law, and I say this from the place that understands how it could never have been imagined. It's unfathomable that in the aftermath or in response to or in context of the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust that took place on 10/7, that burned alive, that raped, that mutilated, that massacred, and that abducted all of those individuals in the state of Israel on Simchat Torah in that massacre, that would be turned to the most Orwellian inversion of fact and of law, to accuse the state of Israel in the International Court of Justice of the atrocities that is the crime of genocide. Again, a term we should shudder when we utter, but instead, the state of Israel is accused of that crime of genocide, even as it defends itself from genocidal terror, openly declaring intent to annihilate it, committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, even as you actually so aptly said, Charles, the responses fueled by the very same anti-Semitism that enabled those atrocities, responses of silence, me too, unless you're a Jew, responses of denial, even while those barbaric savages were live streaming their atrocities, the responses of justification, Judith Butler, rape as armed resistance, and of course, the response of attack of Jews around the world in synagogues in LA, in schools in Montreal, in the streets of New York City and Berlin, the understanding that in response to that worst attack and the accusation of genocide, we arrived at this moment that justifies, that normalizes, that mainstreams this new strain of anti-Semitism, that is anti-Zionism or the negation of Israel's right to exist, that could not have been prepared for in advance. Now that we know, the question is what we do forward-looking. But that is the greatest shortcoming, you're 100% right, of not recognizing this unconventional war for public opinion.
So what do we do next?
So in many ways, actually, we just spoke about the imperative of what I think is the first step, which is recognizing that there is an existential war that is raging, not just on the state of Israel, not just on Jews around the world or those that support Israel's right to exist, self-defined or others defined as Zionists, but actually on the mechanisms, the institutions, the values, the principles that were co-opted and weaponized, and that should be a concern for humanity, right? The international law institutions, I mentioned some of them, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN itself, UN Women, and so on, and the human rights infrastructure, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, that was created to ensure that these principles are upheld, promoted, and protected equally and consistently. Now, demonization, delegitimization, and double standards as that mechanism that enables the mutation of anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred in the world, as Professor Uzi taught us, to mutate, if that is the mechanism, then that mechanism should trouble the entire world because it has weaponized those international institutions, those principles that were intended to be upheld, promoted, and protected. And if they fail to be upheld, promoted, and protected, or applied selectively, so they no longer are upheld, promoted, and protected when it comes to just the Jew or just the Zionist, that is a problem for all those that they were intended to uphold, promote, and protect. And in fact, we see that those institutions created on the never again commitment as a prospective commitment are actually silent in a world of again and again and again. Rwanda, Darfur, as we speak, Sudan, The Uyghurs in China, the understanding that the collapse of the infrastructure, or the collapse of the coal mine, if you will, is only predicted with the bloody canary in the mine shaft, is one that is incredibly important. So we recognize first that it's an existential threat. An existential threat, as I said, to democracies and to all societies that cherish life and liberty. It's important for me to say, it's not just democratic countries, right? We saw the shift in the Abraham Accords. The three Ds, not the three Ds, the three no's of Khartoum being actually replaced by the three yeses of the Abraham Accords to recognition, to negotiation, and to peace in that order, paving the way forward for all peoples of the region, Palestinians included. We recognize each other's right to exist as who we are, in Israel's case, as the nation state of the Jewish people. And then we negotiate the terms of our coexistence, and then that paves the path to our peace amongst our people. And we saw that with the UAE and with Bahrain and so on. And that, in fact, is, I think, prescriptive of what we do going forward, acknowledging that this is a national security threat, reaching across real or perceived differences of politics, of geography, of denomination, of religion, to understand that this is an existential moment for the mine shaft, for that coal mine that threatens to be collapsed. And maybe I'll say internally as a Jewish people, but not only. The understanding that those three Ds of Natan Sharansky can be responded to at this moment in time in a post-10/7 reality, and we would be remiss if we didn't mention precisely what happened in Majd al-Shams just 48 hours ago, where 12 children of the Druze community targeted by a rocket from Lebanon, again, completely in violation of international law by Hezbollah, none other than another proxy of the same Islamic regime in Iran. The understanding that the response to the three Ds that enabled the mutation of anti-Semitism are what I call the three Rs. To remember the history, in this case, the history of the Jewish people that did not begin in Germany, and just as anti-Semitism did not die in Auschwitz. To remember the history of the Jewish people, thousands of year-old prototypical indigenous people. When I say prototypical indigenous, indigeneity has meaning. That speaks the same language, Hebrew, that reads the same book, the Bible, that traverses the same land, Israel, that practices the same customs and rituals for thousands of years. Remembering that story is key, of reclaiming our identity, not just indigeneity, but Zionist as integral to the identity of the majority of Jews and many non-Jews who believe in Israel's right to exist as the single only Jewish nation state. There are tens of Christian majority countries and tens of Muslim majority countries, one Jewish nation state, that we have to reclaim its identity, including that Zionist piece that for thousands of years, our ancestors, all of them, no matter where they lived, because we're a prototypical indigenous people, not white, that's what we are, prayed and yearned and longed to return to Zion. And the reclamation of principles that have been appropriated and weaponized is important for humanity at large, whether it's the understanding of what it is that they were intended to uphold, promote, and protect in international law, institutions, and principles. And finally, to renew the covenant of a people as a people to that nation state to which we return 45% of us there, 45% of us in North America, 10% in the rest of the world, but also to renew the covenant to those foundational principles of international law, of liberal values, small case liberal because we're Canadian, that were appropriated and weaponized, that we have to safeguard for the sake of humanity. Because what 10/7 showed, and the attack in the other day showed us so clearly, is just like 10/7. What these are the attacks of barbarism on our shared civilization. So what begins with the Jews does not end with the Jews, as Elie Wiesel taught us, but the understanding that that also is the template for the map, the roadmap for what we do looking forward is a very important one.
Excellent, well said, if I may. You also spoke about Jewish identity, and in my lecture I was saying how scholarship in Nazi-occupied Germany really defined the Jew as not white and poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race. And it was scholars of eugenics and science and biology and theology and even philosophy that was really the foundation of placing upon the Jewish identity this notion that they weren't white and they were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan nation and race. Fast forward less than 2 generations, once again it's the intellectual. The intellectuals are creating a foundation that's defining Jews as white and as white supremacists and racist and apartheid supporters and colonialists. And it's coming from the best universities and filtering down into civil society. You spoke just now, you mentioned the fact that Jews are indigenous to the land. Could you explain, one of the blessings that we have as Jewish people is that our texts, our ideas are intact, our language has been reestablished. We're very fortunate as a people that's gone through so much over the millennium that we still have access to our wisdom and our teachings. So from a Jewish perspective, not from a postmodern liberal perspective at the Ivy Leagues where they're teaching young Jews that they're white and white racists, or from the old scholarship of Nazi-occupied Germany where Jews were treated scientifically as not being white. From a Jewish perspective, one of the key expressions of power is the capacity to define yourself. What, in your view, is Jewish identity?
So it's such a critical moment to be having this conversation, especially in educational spaces, if you ask me. And I think it's a critical conversation to be having not only amongst ourselves, but with our allies across the countries in which anti-Semitism has, this rise, this tsunami of anti-Semitism has exploded post-10/7. Look, in many ways, I believe that the understanding of what you describe of actually as memory, right? The word memory, zachor, is the word that appears most in the Hebrew Bible. That's what makes us an indigenous people, appropriated, weaponized, and taken away from us, and actually needed to be reclaimed. But the understanding that memory is precisely what allows me to say that last time there was an attempted genocide of the Jewish people in ancient Persia, about 2,500 years ago or so, I know what Mordechai said to Esther, my ancestors. And I know Mordechai said to Esther, if you will be silent now, salvation will come to the Jewish people, and you and your father's home will disappear, and who knows if it's not for this moment you've arrived. And that she in response said to him, gather all the Jews. The understanding that we have in our memory as a people, because that's what we are, Jews. We're not a religion, we have a religion. We're not a culture, we have a culture. We're not a nation state, we have a nation state. What we are is a people. The understanding that we have that capacity means to me, means to us, has to mean to us, is we've been here before. We know to identify what it is that we see. In many ways, that is our responsibility to the world. The understanding that we can actually predict what it is that's ailing the societies, the spaces and the places in which anti-Semitism is festering. And I'll talk about universities in that context in a moment. Predicting their collapse. Anti-Semitism is the seismograph, if you will, just the predictor of, if it's allowed to thrive, to permeate, to infect, to fester in this way, of what will come next. And the understanding that we have in our shared memory, the capability of not only recognizing this, but as I said, never again, as my father taught me, as a prospective commitment, in identifying the current mutation, the current threat, because history does repeat itself, but not in the exact same way. It rhymes, but not in the exact same way does it recur. And that memory is what enables us to identify the current threats that threaten not only Jews and not only their nation state, and of course, to do all we can to prevent recurrence together with allies, because anti-Semitism is not a problem of Jews, it's a problem of anti-Semites and the places and spaces that allow them to thrive. I want to say something about those places and spaces. I mentioned before the international institutions that serve this. The university spaces, and I think this is troubling, I've said it to every university president that I meet, it's a moment of reckoning for academia. If science, it doesn't matter to me anymore if it's social sciences or hard sciences, because we're there, medical schools and physics departments are there as well. If science is appropriated and weaponized, it is the final frontier. It regulates, it normalizes, it mainstreams what is actually prescient of what we know happened in the Holocaust, the next step after science gave its stamp of approval to this declared, justified hatred, if you will. And we didn't mention at all, but we live at a time of social media. And if I had to typify how viruses spread, well, social media, that's even before AI, is like the super spreader of any kind of misinformation, disinformation that threatens the fabric of societies. So that is the moment that we're at. It is, as I said, an existential moment with a great deal of responsibility and a great deal of hope that we have allies in all of those spaces and places, and what you do in creating scholarship and in taking back or reclaiming those foundational principles in the very institutions that will decide ultimately, is humanity still committed to the pursuit of knowledge, teaching people how to think, which is the critical, most important mission of universities, or are we actually in regress, teaching people what to think that will actually, enable the next terrible atrocities that will be committed surely. So thank you for all that you do as well, and creating that scholarship is very, very important at this time.
Thank you for your insightful analysis, and I think the State of Israel is very fortunate that you're the special envoy in anti-Semitism, and you're educating people, I know, within Israel, but also certainly around the world. So we're grateful for all the work that you do, and thank you for being here on the ISGAP Hour. We're honored to be here with Professor Uzi Rabi from Tel Aviv University, where he's the director of the Moshe Dayan Center on Middle East and African Studies. And Uzi just gave an amazing lecture here at the ISGAP-Oxford Summer Institute on critical anti-Semitism studies. So welcome, Uzi.
It's great to be here.
Good to be here. So thanks for being here. You're a regular at our Summer Institute, and your perspective is very important on the Middle East. And we were talking, your lecture was speaking about the ideology of Hamas. Can you touch on what do you think in a short period of time, the viewers at JBS in the United States, what should they take away from, I guess, the importance of the ideology of Hamas? What do they stand for? And is it something, a lot of Americans want to negotiate with Hamas? And what do you think?
Well, what I think we should note is that Hamas, first of all, is kind of an auxiliary force, or something that kind of an organization that was given birth by Muslim Brothers. Muslim Brothers ideology is well known. What we have to know when it comes to Hamas versus Israel, that Hamas actually has controlled Gaza in 2006, and from then on, actually, he strives for annihilating Israel. This is his own deeds and words, and everything could be found in his charter. But basically, when we talk about Hamas/Muslim Brothers, we are talking about a body which is vying for, I would say, kind of a universal control of Islam. And basically, it sees the West in general as the main enemy. Israel is just a byproduct of the West that was installed in the Middle East in order to export capitalism, imperialism, Westernism in the Middle East. So basically, it's kind of a holistic view. For these guys, the other is West/Israel, or in a more, in other words, it could be Crusaders/Jews. And basically, we are getting closer to kind of a situation where conflicts are being translated into religious views and outlook. If that is the case, I am afraid that what we do see in the Middle East is becoming kind of a more religious conflict. I mean, it's nature. And when we do talk about religious conflict, we know that the spillover effects are definitely can be negative and be seen in the short future or the near future in both the Middle East and the world. And this is why Hamas, as an idea and as an organ which controls Gaza and comes up with all these ideas, should be nipped in the bud in order to make sure that it is not becoming kind of an avant-garde with which to sell the merchandise of interclash or inter-civilizational clash, something that would actually dichotomically put East and West in kind of an opposing directions.
So when you say it's becoming a religious conflict with the Muslim Brotherhood playing an integral, fundamental role in this emerging religious war through the eyes of Hamas, Hamas being an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, is there room in this sort of worldview of the Muslim Brotherhood to accept the self-determination of the Jewish people and Israel?
Yes, but only under Islamic Caliphate or Islamic rule. So the whole notion of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is that there is no background or grounds whatsoever to have a state named Israel with either Jewish or Zionist character. What they mean by saying that is that Palestine, and of course this can be taken elsewhere too, should be Muslim, under Muslim rule. Jews, as was the case in the history, can become subjects of that kind of state. In any case, this state is not going to carry the banner of either Judaism or Zionism as something by which to identify.
And establishing a caliphate not only does away with the state of Israel, it replaces democracy. It replaces the notion where a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a man, a woman, a straight person, a gay person would be equal under one legal system.
Yeah, maybe we should just be very cautious about that and say, they would like actually to have Islam becoming the main ideology for all means and purposes in any state we do talk about. It could be Britain, it could be France, it could be here, it could be that. Caliphate is the day after, so to speak. But in any case, what you have to do, and this is the main mission of the Muslim Brothers, is to create kind of an Islamic platform with which actually to start selling the merchandise and to create bottom-up kind of an infrastructure where actually afterwards it would be very, very difficult to the state itself not to consider them politically speaking, economically speaking, culturally speaking, and religiously speaking. So if we are talking that way, we do understand what's going on in Europe nowadays as the beginning of sort of a march by which portions of the population are not only Muslim, they are becoming actually kind of, people who do have different loyalties, the state and the religion. According to some, let us say, prominent clerics in the Muslim Brothers, for example, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, you have to be first and foremost loyal to your religion, thereafter to your state. So if that is the case, in the long run, European states would find themselves with kind of a situation, socio-demographically speaking, where portions of their population are having kind of first loyalty to the religion, not to the state. Here comes actually the clash between both, sides of the river, the West and the East. Who should I be loyal to? Who am I? The state is just kind of a recommendation. It's not something actually that makes your identity be 100%, corresponding with your national identity. Nationalism and religion, when especially it comes to Islam, this is kind of a very well-known, I would say, clash of identities. And, it is in the Middle East because we know it, because this is the case. In the West, and this is what I'm afraid of, there is sort of an ignorance about that thing, and it could easily be dragged into kind of an open war, civil war, bloody war, and other things that are going actually to turn some European states, in my opinion, into kind of a very, very volatile arena.
How do you see the role of anti-Semitism in the European and even American context as these tensions are being played out with internationally, but also within Western societies?
Well, I mean, Jews are being attacked nowadays by this neo-anti-Semitism, not of their being Jews only, but mainly by their being Zionist in potentia. So they are being identified with Israel. Either what they want, they don't want, it doesn't matter. It is becoming the new anti-Semitism to just speak against Zionists at large. And of course, actually, as kind of a side effect of that, it goes with the Judaism. As I said before, actually, blurs boundaries between Jews and Zionists are being blurred deliberately in order to create kind of an impression that when it comes to the problem, It would be Israel, it would be Zionism and Judaism, and this is the neo-anti-Semitism, with which actually to make the Western public actually pay attention to such stuff. And here's the other way actually we definitely dissent. This is a laboratory by which the Muslim enclaves in Europe and the United States, to a large extent actually being run financially, ideologically by Muslim brothers, are putting to the test, while using these anti-Semitic motives, putting to the test the way actually they could counter-argue or come up with counter-arguments against the state, and in what way the state is responsive. What they have managed to find is that the West, at large, to a large extent, and the states themselves, more often than not, are coming up with sort of an apologetic response by which to turn Jews into sort of a scapegoat in order to appease the mind of many Muslim blocs, either politically or socially or economically. But this is the stuff that actually we do see. And the more they see how weak the state's response is, the more they're going to be anti-Semitic. So basically anti-Semitism is becoming kind of a tool by which those bad guys, so to speak, are going actually to put to the test their ability to challenge the incumbent regime and to, call or vie for other ideology to become very dominant in their respective state.
So as we're speaking, it seems it's possible for the war in the Middle East and Israel to expand, to become a wider conflict, a more intense conflict. And this is happening with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Iranian Revolutionary Regime, with Hezbollah, kind of the proxies of the Iranian regime, at a time when it appears that the United States and even Europe is very hesitant to be involved in the Middle East, and if it even looks like they would like to leave.
They are very hesitant because of the things we talked about before. But I beg actually the free world to understand, if somebody thinks that what is going on in Gaza between Israel and Hamas is kind of a local conflict, so here are the news. It is definitely a Middle Eastern conflict because it has to do with the Muqawama axis headed by Iran, which is trying to become hegemon in this region. On the other side, we're gonna see some moderate Arab states, so to speak, that are so afraid of Iran that they went all the way to go with Israel and the West in order to compile kind of an alliance by which to better cope with Iran. And I dare say that it's not only in the Middle East. If you go on to the globe, you would find Russia, China, North Korea supporting one way or the other Iran, collaborating with this axis. And sadly, we do see kind of a very solid cooperation there. What we don't see when it comes to Israel and some Arab states in this region, and the way they are being supported and promoted, their interests is promoted by the West. So this is becoming kind of a weak link in this chain, and basically it is being capitalized on by Iran and company. And this is the time for democracies to come to the fore, to stand for themselves, and to make sure that they are not going to deal with such issues in kind of a mere naivete that would end up with a disaster. And this is something that happened to my country, Israel, when Israel thought that all these problems should be dealt with in kind of, let's say, Western style manner. I am afraid that this is not actually the way to deal with that. So we should use that as kind of a wake-up call for the free world to start dealing with these serious problems in kind of a very serious manner, Otherwise, I'm afraid we're going to have a totally different world in the coming years.
So we were saying earlier that in every, it's a Chinese proverb, every crisis there's tremendous opportunity, and we're in a crisis. What do you think? What is the opportunity now? If the Israelis would take a very a look at its situation and be strategic, what are the opportunities in these very challenging?
I mean, that's the where the cracks of matter lie. A lot of opportunities, and I can tell you that personally. I've been to many Arab states in the recent years, states who did normalize their relations with Israel because they understood that Israel is not the enemy, and they are so afraid of Iran, leaning heavily on the United States. What they would like to see is actually United States is back in the region, at least supporting actually this backup when it comes to Iran, cooperating with Israel, and I'm talking about Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, I hope, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. All these states have jumped to the conclusion that geopolitically speaking, the enemy is Iran. Ecologically, economically speaking, the enemy is Mother Nature. Since these were marked as the main dangers to cope with for the survival, the politics of survival in the 21st century, Israel is a more than well laboratory with which to cooperate in order to better deal with those problems. I have seen that. I know that there is a huge potential in that. There are states which are pretty moderate, not to translate reality by apocalyptic motives, religious motives, or whatsoever. Economy, peace of mind, just coming up with kind of a cooperation that would make one thing 100% sure. You are different than me. But what we have to do is to respect the otherness of the other. I should respect your difference. You're being different than me. And if we are able to respect each other, we can definitely build up something that would be very, very resilient for years, because it is based on common interests. And basically in our laboratory, when we are trying actually to provide Israel with kind of a way by which to go on with that optimistic vision, what we have to do is not to ask ourselves how much of a friend he can make, to what extent he loves me or likes me. These are not the questions. What we are trying to do is to find actually the spot where our interests and his abilities, or vice versa, can be corresponded in kind of a very smooth way by which both sides are going actually to just be benefited. And believe me, Charles, renewable energies, water planning, desertification, we have so many stuff to work on in order to better cope with the 21st century realities. What we got now is those lunatics, bad guys, who are not only actually create sort of a retreat in terms of what I just said before, they put in danger any cooperation whatsoever between people who are coming on with their logic and rationale in order to better foster with their future. We have next generations. We have to deal with that. Everything is very, very urgent. It's becoming urgent. And this is why I think that the free world should say loud and clear when it comes to Hamas / Al-Qaeda / ISIS. These guys should be out of our road. I mean, should be untolerated. In my opinion, the next thing is how to deal with Iran. This is a real problem by itself, because these guys are very shrewd, very cunning, very sophisticated. They know how to capitalize on democratic, weakness when it comes to Western states. They know how to deceive, how to lie, actually. And in my opinion, this is the other thing that must be dealt with. And I don't know if we have to deal with the nukes, if we have to deal with the regime. But in any case, the situation that was created in the Middle East in the recent year is becoming very, very dangerous for the free world, in my opinion. So it's high time actually to sit together, to build up a comprehensive plan by which to start dealing with the problems themselves in order to be able to get together to deal with the real problems of the 21st century. And I hope that this would be the case.
Thank you, Uzi. Thanks for your insights and your wisdom and all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'm sure the JBS viewers appreciate it as well. So thank you.
I have to tell you that I really appreciate actually the effort which is seen by ISGAP in recent years, especially the seminar. And when we have such, in my opinion, right to the point seminars as the seminar we are in now, this is exactly the first real step to start understanding the problems in order to foster some solutions to the dangers we have to cope with. So thank you so much for hosting me here. It's a real pleasure.
It's a privilege for us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Uzi.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Harris, and on behalf of the ISGAP Hour, Fighting Anti-Semitism, I'm very pleased to be together here at Oxford University with Dr. Naya Lekht. Naya is a Soviet Jew who came to the United States with her family, who did her PhD at UCLA, if I recall correctly, Naya, on Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And who, most importantly for this conversation, is a very prominent and well-respected Jewish educator. And Naya, talk to us about the state of Jewish education, in particular, what's changed after October 7th?
Well, thank you so much for having me. So the state of Jewish education it's a broad topic, and one kind of category is the state of Jewish education within Jewish schools, and the other is the state of how Jewish kids in public schools are experiencing anti-Semitism, which is not what kids in Jewish day schools are experiencing. And so I would kind of separate those two experiences. So in terms of Jewish education, unfortunately, I've been saying this for many years, I first detected anti-Zionism when I was myself an undergraduate student on campus, and this was around the year 2001, 2002. And there were two events, I always say, 9/11 and Second Intifada, which produced anti-Zionism. Now, being a Soviet Jew, this is not a new anti-Semitism at all. The Soviets had created the anti-Zionist campaign, and so to speak, the first victims of anti-Zionism were Soviet Jews.
So wait, to stop you for a moment, because this is one of those very current debates still. Is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? And you are saying?
100% it is. And if it's not, I'll say this, if not an intent, then an effect. We know that when anti-Zionist rhetoric is employed or deployed, anti-Semitism follows, anti-Semitic action. It's been documented, both historically and today.
And you're making the point that this is not new at all, and anyone who knows the Soviet Union knows that this is, first of all, this was largely created in the Soviet Union. Am I not?
Absolutely. The slogan, Zionism is racism. Israel is an apartheid state. Israelis are Nazis. This was crafted by the KGB, by the Soviets. These are slogans, and it became operational in the Soviet Union, seriously operational.
And we're talking about the 1960s, 1970s.
And even in the 1980s, right? And so I didn't experience it. I grew up in America, but my parents did. And so I learned kind of through them. And so when I saw it on college campus, I knew right away. Now, I went to university administrators. I went to Jewish professionals. And unfortunately, 20 years ago, the American Jewish community was just not equipped with dealing with anti-Zionism, because I was told that it is just legitimate criticism of Israel. I was told that I'm making this into a bigger problem. Well, 20 years later, it hasn't died down. It didn't, go
to the contrary.
Exactly, to the contrary. And especially October 7th. You know, I have a friend and we discuss anti-Semitism a lot. And I've been thinking about it. And what is October 7th? October 7th is many things. But for us Jews in the diaspora, it solidifies that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's as if the anti-Semite has a pizza in front of him or her. And October 7th is the first person took the slice, and then it's now become socially acceptable. And we're all partaking in this dish of anti-Semitism. It's gone so viral. It's become acceptable. It's not only acceptable, it's become something that people feel, well, that's anti-Semitism. That's how anti-Semitism works. You see, the Jew represents the villain. And so you feel self-righteous. It's a righteous cause. And so now what I'm seeing on college campuses, I can't tell you that I'm surprised. I'm not surprised because it's been operational for the last 20 years. And back to Jewish education. Jewish education was not equipped to deal with this because.
Okay, so let's stop there, because you have not just the vantage point of a Soviet Jewish family and their understanding, but you focus not on universities so much today as on K through 12. And in a way, that's the
next battleground.
The next battleground, if not the current battleground, and you've been one of those people saying it. So what's happening?
Oh, well, K through 12 is a serious problem. So it started off around the year 2019-20. We in the Jewish community were tipped off about this ethnic studies curriculum in the state of California. The viewers should understand that the ethnic studies curriculum was decades in the making. We only found out about it in 2020, 2019. And when we started looking at it and seeing what was in it is Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda. Israel is a settler colonial state. Zionism is racism. America is guilty of colonialism. I mean, all the canards that come with anti-Semitism. And I was working also with high school students, and they were reporting to me high levels of, what I call really assault of their identity. So teachers coming into classrooms, pulling out maps in the Middle East. It doesn't say Israel, it would say Palestine. So complete erasure of Israel. And so what happened was that finally this ethnic studies curriculum was mandated legally by Gavin Newsom in the state of California. And now in order to graduate high school in the state of California, you have to fulfill this ethnic studies elective requirement. That's a big problem because you're putting students in a classroom and you're teaching them, effectively you're teaching them lies about the Jewish people. You're teaching them the Jews have no ties to the land of Israel, which is a lie.
And the efforts of some Jewish organizations to try and modify the curriculum,
it's a touchy
had any result?
It's difficult for me to answer you this question. I think that overall we have not been successful, and I'll tell you why. I think that we have not been successful because largely we are operating within a framework of oppressed and oppressor. And so we think, oh, well, if we can only prove that we are oppressed Jews, then we'll fit into this ethnic studies. So we'll talk about the Holocaust. We'll talk about ourselves as victims. But that's not Zionism. Zionism is the return of the Jewish people to history. It's a beautiful story of dignity and resilience. But you can't teach it within this model. So what Jewish organizations sadly have done is said, okay, I'll check my Zionism at this door in order to get into this curriculum. I'll talk about Jews of color. I'll talk about the Holocaust, but I won't talk about Israel, which is the heart of this anti-Semitism today.
But even that approach doesn't necessarily work with the intersectional crowd in California or elsewhere, does it?
No.
Jews as victims.
No, because Jews are seen as white, of course, and white having white privilege, and so it doesn't work, no.
And am I correct in remembering that even for out-of-staters who want to go to university in California, a public university,
yes,
presumably, at least, they have to take the courses that were mandated for high school students, yes, in California?
Correct, yes.
So it affects the
it's
whole
a prerequisite,
nation.
yes.
For anyone who wishes to go to Berkeley or UCLA or any of the great schools out there,
yeah, or
once great schools out there.
Yeah.
And you're saying the governor of California signed this legislation?
Yes. It's called AB 101 bill.
So is the situation any better in the Jewish day schools, whether in California or elsewhere? How have they shifted? How are they preparing children not just for the world of prayer and ritual and curiosity and religion and theology, but for the world they're going to encounter on the university campus.
So I've written quite a bit about this. I've studied I myself am a product of Jewish education. I went to a Reform and Conservative Jewish day school. For many years, the Jewish community and the Jewish day schools have taken the approach that we are not going to teach about the conflict.
Really?
Yes, and I've spoken to many leaders in Jewish communities, and they've said to me, we did this. It was intentional. That's kind of the sad thing. It was intentional because we didn't want to offend anybody's sensibilities. Because for some reason, this conversation has been hijacked to be a political conversation versus an identity one. Israel is not political. I mean, okay, it can become political, but for Jews, it's about our identity.
The history of Zionism, the history of modern Israel is political?
Yes, in certain schools. But I will say that there has been a shift after October 7th. October 7th has in many ways woken the Jews up. American Jews, and I do
Jewish
see
day schools.
and Jewish days, and I do see initiatives. I do see programs being brought in. I still think that they are operating under some misguided frameworks. One of which is it's essential to know that Jews come from Judea. Jews are indigenous to Israel. We are a nation. We are an Am Yisrael. We are a people. That is the most important thing right now to be teaching, and so. I do see a lot of great initiative, but I'm a little bit worried once again that maybe American Jewish education community day schools will treat this moment as, instead of leaning into teaching about the conflict, maybe leading into, Jewish values.
So if Naya Lekht could wave a magic wand,
Yeah.
What would you wish for in Jewish education today? Today, post-October 7th.
Yeah, today, Jewish education today must deal with 3 foundational topics. Jewish identity, which is peoplehood. Teach our Jewish kids that we are part of a nation, that we are part of the Jewish nation, we are tied to the land of Israel. You teach that.
Are we a race?
Well, listen, you can do a 23andMe, right? Is that not based on blood?
It is for Ashkenazi Jews.
But not for right. That's the thing about Judaism or being Jewish. It's a category of identity that you could be an ethnicity, it could be a religion, it could possibly be a race as well.
But is it a white race?
No, it's not a white race. Yes, it's not a white race.
Okay, you said there were 3. The
Jewish
first is
identity.
we are a people.
We are a people.
A tribe, a people, a nation.
A tribe, a people, a nation. The second, you have to teach about the conflict. Because that's where today's anti-Zionism, where that resides. My degree's in Russian literature. I did not think I would become somebody who would work on Arab-Israeli conflict. But why? Because that's where today's anti-Semitism resides, right? And so you have to teach about the story of Israel, not just as this innovation nation, but also the wars, the conflicts, what the Jews did in order to secure a legal claim to the land. Because it's not just a historic claim. The Jews went through a very rigorous process to work with the League of Nations to ensure that their return to the land of Israel was legal. That's really important. Okay, and the third thing that we must invest in, and people don't like, is advocacy. You have to understand you are fighting for yourselves right now. You have to embrace it. Identity, history of the conflict, and advocacy.
So on the third point, Naya, in your interaction with parents of the children you work with, do most of the parents get it? That today we are in a war and advocacy is needed, and whether the kids like it or not, they're going to face it on campuses?
100%.
Or is that still controversial?
No, the parents get it.
Parents get it.
The parents get it, and the students even get it now.
And
yes.
the schools get it.
The schools are getting it the last, interestingly enough,
Really?
but the parents are getting it. Many of the parents are the ones pushing and asking for schools to include curriculum to make sure that the children are prepared for when they come to college, to graduate school. It's beyond even college now.
It can be the workplace.
In the workplace,
social,
absolutely. Yeah.
social set. But how do you deal with the fact that parents say, well, wait a second, there's not one linear narrative of Zionism in Jewish history. Someone doesn't like the Likud party and right of center prime ministers, and someone doesn't like the Labour Party and left of center, and they have different views on the Palestinian question. How do you navigate all that?
But those are important questions that you can have. But that's not the question of Zionism. Zionism states merely that the state should exist.
So you create the foundation.
Yes, it exists. How it should exist, we should have a conversation. But it's like denying that I exist. Or
so
my
the focus of education needs to be Zionism as an integral part of Jewish understanding and self-identity.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. It's a very important point. Our detractors have been very successful for many years because we have allowed them to treat Zionism as merely a political movement and ideology. But it is no different than Jewish identity. That's why I don't like to use the word pro-Israel, for instance. It's like saying pro-Shabbat. I'm not going to say pro-Shabbat. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. We have to embrace that Israel and Zionism is part of who we are.
So Naya, but as an educator, it's easier to reach the kids in Jewish day schools. But most Jewish kids until today are in non-Jewish day school settings. So how do you reach them?
It's actually easier to reach the kids in secular because they're experiencing the anti-Semitism.
But how do you actually physically get them in a room or online or wherever it is you need to meet them?
I see what you're saying. Well, listen, I've been, emailing schools. I get sometimes invited to speak, but it has to come from students. Sometimes I know parents of kids, and the kids invite me to their schools to speak. But that's a big problem. That's a big gap, and who is addressing that need for those Jewish kids? How to get to them in public schools?
So that's a major priority that has not yet been solved. Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes left, and we need to get to another big issue that I'm not sure that JBS viewers all know about. They need to. It's the initials APR, and it has nothing to do with interest rates or mortgage rates. What is APR in this context, and why should JBS viewers know what it is?
Okay. APR stands for Anti-Palestinian Racism. It is the latest initiative put forth by the Arab Association of Lawyers in Canada. It's a new framework that they are trying to pass in different districts, and it has already passed in the Toronto School District.
Which is the largest school district in Canada.
Correct. And teacher unions in the United States of America, the AFT, the American Foundation of Teachers, this summer have been basically toying with this framework. This is a framework that basically, in many ways, it takes what we created, which is IRA, the definition of anti-Semitism.
Right, the working definition
of anti-Semitism, IRA, and built the same for the Palestinian cause.
So reverse engineering. They took IRA and they now, in a sense, wherever the words Jews and Zionism in Israel appeared?
Palestinian. So just some examples.
Give me an example of what would be considered anti-Palestinian racism. Concrete examples.
Denial of the Nakba.
So one has to accept that the Palestinian narrative about the catastrophe
yes.
Is indisputable.
Indisputable.
And if you dispute it,
you are engaging.
You are racist.
Yes.
Okay. Another example.
Another example is rejecting a oppressor-oppressed framework. If you say I'd like to teach about this conflict using a different framework, you're engaging in anti-Palestinian racism.
Okay.
Okay. Another one, wearing a pin, an Israeli pin. If you are a student, let's say, and you want to, you're going to your Jewish club and you want to wear a pin, you could be accused of anti-Palestinian racism.
Now, you wrote an article, I think, in the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles, which I would encourage JBS viewers to find online and to read. And you're saying in that article, first of all, this is an oncoming problem. And secondly, you're saying this is an unintended consequence, perhaps, of the IRA working definition.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So what do we do about it?
What do we do about it? Well, we must fight that this framework does not get adopted into our schools. I mean, we must do everything we can. But it's a deeper conversation about our schools in general. Our schools have been hijacked by activists, propagandists. It's true. These people have been developing this curriculum. All summer I've been watching, for instance, there's Teach Palestine workshops all throughout the summer for teachers, and they're getting credits for it. So how do we fight this? We fight this by, we have to go to our, school boards. We have to ring the alarm bells, but we need the Jewish community to be strong and unified and not, the Jewish community sometimes is so fractured. And when we have Jews within, who say, it's okay, we're going to lose.
So the first step is to move from complacency to awareness, and that's exactly what you're alerting JBS viewers to APR, anti-Palestinian racism, which would suppress 90%, it sounds like, of any discussion or debate about Arab-Israeli issues.
Yes.
We just have a few seconds left, but we're here together at Oxford University for an ISGAP seminar. Tell me about your relationship to ISGAP.
So ISGAP is a really special place for me. I am a research fellow with ISGAP. My research involves education and education initiatives on anti-Semitism. I think that within the space of educating on anti-Semitism, I find that ISGAP is the only institution that's willing to teach about things that are quote unquote taboo in a lot of other places, such as the dangers of radical leftism, totalitarian left, and Marxism, the dangers of radical Islamism, political Islam. When I first started as a scholar in 2018 and I came to ISGAP, it was the only place that I ever heard what I'm hearing. I don't hear that in any other institution, academic institution. So it's.
And to add, Naya, your role here is not just to teach, but to help the 100 or so educators who are here to create their own curriculums
yes.
to teach in high schools and universities. Is that correct?
Yes.
So each year this program continues and it multiplies the number of people?
Yes, it's the biggest that's ever been this year, yes.
So the idea is create curriculums?
Create curriculums, and the great thing about ISGAP is that it's also making space for policymakers and people in the nonprofit world. Because after October 7th, we have a lot of people who are interested in anti-Semitism training, not just formal education in a classroom, but how do you teach about anti-Semitism if you only have 1 hour? So there are people developing that as well.
Our guest was Dr. Naya Lekht. Please look her up, read her material, and thank you for watching the ISGAP Hour.
Thank you.